this incident is not evidence of a two-tier policing system. And I'll prove to you why it's not evidence of a two-tier policing system. Look, me saying that and other people saying that does not mean that they're saying there isn't a two-tier policing system. I don't believe there is. I don't believe there's a two-tier policing system, but that's not what I'm saying when I say that this incident is not evidence for a two-tiered policing system. And you have to understand the difference between those two things. Using this as your evidence is flawed and disrespectful, because the family have specifically said do not politicize Henry's death, and it's misplaced. And please don't get dragged into this by foolishness from people like Nigel Farage, whose arguments embarrass him even more anyway. Please don't get dragged along that rhetoric. It's absolute nonsense. Is it evidence that there's flaws in our policing? Yes. Are there flaws in our policing? Yes. Are those flaws racially biased, or are our police so bombarded with racial equality training that they're making bad decisions? Possibly. I don't know. We can have a discussion about that. Is this evidence for that? No, absolutely not. So that has to stop, right? I'm willing to have that conversation another time, but that's not what this is. And I can prove it to you, right? There's a serious proof from watching this video that more training is needed to the police. The right type of training, response training, restraint training, incident training. Now also, there's loads of that needed in the security industry. So that's not criticizing the police. There's lots of that needed, because this is an ever-evolving world with multiple evolutionary factors that contribute to loads of these events, right? And that's the same for security, for anybody in this industry. Loads of people can make mistakes, and loads of people do. And there's inadequately trained people in all sectors. So it's not maybe an overly critical of the police, but the only way that we can improve policing, in my opinion, is with training and funding. That's the two biggest factors that we need when we're improving the police. Do I believe that there's a racial inequality bias in that they're taught to look after racial minorities more than they are white people? Absolutely, I do not believe that at all. I do not believe that. I work with the police on a daily basis. I do not believe that exists. I believe that there might be caution when police officers approach instances that are race related. I do believe that, of course. There's also fear that these things will be recorded and the police will be judged by you guys, by the media, by politicians, and that impacts on on how people do their jobs. I believe all of those things exist, right? And I believe that that does need to be looked at. I do not believe that the police are policing white people differently than they are other ethnicities. I don't. And unless you bring me solid evidence, which I'll have that discussion with you if you do, unless you bring me solid evidence, please stop saying it. Because if you haven't got the evidence, this is not the evidence for that, okay? And I'll prove to you why. So let's have a look at this Henry Nowak thing. We'll reiterate some of the stuff that I did in my previous video, but it's important. The fundamentals, the very important thing is how police respond to incidents. They respond primarily because they receive a 999 call comes in, and the dispatcher gives the police the information that you give the 999 call handler, and that's what the police will receive. Brilliant. In this instance, what the 999 call handler heard was a racially motivated attack where a Sikh man had been attacked, his turban had been hit off, he'd been punched in the face, the person had assaulted him and then tried to flee. That's what was pretty much been told. He was told there was no weapons at the scene. Multiple times that was said. No weapons had been used, no weapons were at the scene. So what we've got now is the police have to respond to the incident that they've been given in front of them. If I was responding to that incident, I would be going to an incident where I thought there was a racial attack and a white person has attacked people of colour, or a Sikh specifically. Now, That's the information the police get. It's nighttime, massive contributing factor. Because there was a lot of blood at the scene, but it's nighttime, it's hard to see. When the police turn up, there's a group of Sikh males who are the people who made the phone call, i.e. they're saying they are the victims in this instance. They're saying they've got the perpetrator, the male who's on the floor, who happened to be Henry. They've got him, he's injured, he's bleeding from the mouth, but they've got him, he's the person who did it. They reiterate their stance. He attacked me and my brother, he attacked my brother, he hit his turban off, he hit him in the face. So I've turned up now as this police officer to the job, which I believe is a racially motivated attack where people have been verbally and physically assaulted. The people who made the call, the victims, have stayed around. They subdued the perpetrator and they've got him there. All of this looks like an open and shut case for the police of the fact that there's an assault, racially motivated, the male's been overpowered. How often do the police officers, and specifically here, how often do these police officers attend jobs where the perpetrator is the one who's made the 999 call, then stayed around, having assaulted the other person, they've stayed around and waited to give you the information? I would probably add that never happens, or a very, very small percentage of the time. So, what's going through this police officer's head immediately is, oh, this guy's assaulted them, they've stayed around, okay, this is open and shut for me, I'll nick him and we're all done. Right? Easy day's work. That's what's going through this police officer's head. Now, job of a police officer when he attends a situation: gather information, gather evidence, make arrests if necessary, detain, etc. That's the job of the police officer. He turns up, he speaks to people. The first people he speaks to are the Digwell brothers, and they tell him exactly what they said on the phone. There's been assault, there's no weapons, blah, blah, blah. He's tried to escape, he climbed on some bins, he's fallen off, he's injured himself, he's got blood in his mouth. First mistake of the police officer, doesn't check that. Okay, I need to check some injuries then. Because even if Henry was the perpetrator in this, if he's got injuries because he fell off a bin and has blood in his mouth, should that be checked? Yes. Did he not check that because of a racial bias? No, I absolutely do not agree with that. I think he's just not done it. He's just not done the job as well as he should. He's seen Henry moving, making noises, and he's got blood. He thinks he's got a minor injury, but the guy's resisting a little bit. Okay. So then at this point, I think what the police officer has done is he's attended the scene. He started to do what he's meant to do. And then he's ignored some very vital because of what happened. In 9 out of 10 jobs that he attends, he'd get away with ignoring these signs. Vital in this situation parts, which has then led to this. Now, then Henry has then said, I've been stabbed. I've been stabbed. 2 or 3 times he says that before the police officer responds to it, right? Then when the police officer does respond to it, where have you been stabbed? Henry doesn't respond. Where have you been stabbed? I don't think you have, mate. Okay, that's a terrible flaw. It's a terrible flaw because I've been stabbed. Okay, where have you been stabbed? Who stabbed you? This is where a line of questioning comes in, right? He then detains Henry with handcuffs. Now, here's my thing with that. That's not uncommon. The male has been accused of racially, physically assaulting somebody. The other person does have injuries. They've stayed around and said that they've detained the guy. When you arrest and detain somebody, you would put them in cuffs if they're physically aggressive. Now look, I don't want your input if you don't arrest people. If you've never effected an arrest, I don't want your input. Actually effecting an arrest and doing it properly in the right circumstances, getting everything in order, reading people their rights, checking on their, is a big process in the moment of everything else that's going on. When you've got a group of Sikh men as well telling you they've been assaulted, the pressure's on you, okay? Now, I've effected arrests. Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act I've used, and common law I've used to effect an arrest and detain people in mechanical restraints, i.e. cuffs. So I know what the pressures are, and I know that when there's a physically violent person or someone's been accused of physical violence and you've got someone who's been assaulted, it's not uncommon to put somebody in handcuffs. That's not uncommon, okay? So he handcuffs the guy. As he handcuffs the guy, he then gets told he's been stabbed again. That, for me, he should have done his checks then. He should have done them before, but he should have done his checks then. He should have done a full, sat him up. Where have you been stabbed, mate? That's a few times you've said that now. Where have you been stabbed and who stabbed you? He should have done that, yes. Is he doing that because he's racially inclined to believe that the white man's attacked the Sikh? No. He's doing that because he's told, this is the man who's done the assault. I'm the man who's been assaulted. The race factor for me doesn't play a part in this bit, okay? So we've not got two-tiered policing here. We've got policing flaws. Yeah, we've got mistakes that are made in this moment. Mistakes that on 9 jobs that he attends out of 10, he's going to get away with because the impact is not going to be as big. In this instance, unfortunately, somebody died. Now, it's really sad and it shouldn't happen and it does need investigating and something has to happen and specifically that officer needs to be dealt with. It's not for me to say what. I'm not part of the IPCC. I'm not part of an auditing team for the police. I'm not. I can give insight to what I think should happen, but I'm not getting into that here. But that does need to be taken care of because there were flaws and they happen to be huge flaws. But those huge flaws did not lead to the death of Henry Nowak. And here's why. And now we'll use evidence, okay? So, when the police attend and Henry's on the floor and Henry says that he's been stabbed and then subsequently he dies, okay? At that point, it has been said that absolutely no medical or emergency attention would have saved Henry in that instance. There were 1,200 millilitres or over 2 pints of blood in his lungs because when his lungs were punctured, it severed a small vein that bled into the lung. Basically, if Henry would have been stabbed in emergency department, he still might not have survived. Okay? So it wasn't the fact that the officer handcuffed him, it wasn't the fact that the officer took 3 minutes longer. Henry would not have survived that. An ambulance attending, he would not have survived. Okay? So what the police's actions aren't even contributing factors to Henry's death. I'm not saying he dealt with it well. I said previously the officer dealt with it badly and that needs to be looked at. Mistakes were made. But it's not a contributing factor to his death. This is where the George Floyd comparison doesn't come in. Derek Chauvin's actions were a direct resulting factor in George Floyd's death. This officer's actions were not. It was just policing that proves that there needs to be more training, or that officer specifically needs more training. And that might just be that he's not attended assault or such severe assaults previously. Okay? Factors that contributed to Henry's death. A phone call was made by Gurpreet, the brother, and he lied. Well, we don't know if he lied because we don't know if he knew at this point, but he lied now in hindsight about what had happened to Henry. Vikram lied over the phone and in person. Now what happened was, as soon as the police officer realised and saw the injuries and knew that what happened to Henry, he immediately arrested Vikram. Okay? He immediately arrested him. Now there's all this argument, he didn't put him in cuffs, he didn't do this, he didn't, but that's irrelevant because if you've got a person who's being compliant and he says he's going to get in the back of a van, he's showing no violence towards you, then you might not put him in handcuffs. Me personally, I probably would have done, but that's irrelevant because in the moment, that's up to that police officer to make that decision. And I don't even know if it was that police officer who was the arresting police officer because there was multiple officers there. But if he's being compliant, you wouldn't have put him in handcuffs necessarily. Henry, on the other hand, was put in handcuffs because he's on the floor, he's been accused of an assault. Now, I don't think it's wrong for that police officer to have put Henry in handcuffs, only because of hindsight, because Henry was injured. As soon as he said he was stabbed, I think the police officer should have checked. As soon as Henry said that he couldn't breathe, he should have been made more comfortable and put in a better position, other than the recovery position, which is generally a good position. He should have said, right, where have you been stabbed and who by? And there should have been further investigation in that moment, okay? But the police officer did arrest at the scene, or Vikram was arrested at the scene. Well, not days later, he was arrested at the scene as soon as that was announced. So for me, we can prove undoubtedly that there were flaws in the policing in that moment, in that incident. But remember, it seems like open and shut case to everybody. Look, how many times if you're a doorman or a security officer, someone's kicking off in a nightclub, you run in and you just grab everyone and bring them out, and you turn out one person's punched the other person in the face, the other person's not done anything, he's just been punched, but you still grabbed them both and dragged them out, the victim and the perpetrator. Of course. So if that victim would have been white and the person who hit would have been a person of colour, are you then accused of a racial disparity? No, of course not. It's not two-tier policing. This is not evidence of two-tier policing. This is evidence of a policing error. Yes, it's a grave error because of the consequences and what we now know happened. But like I said, in hindsight, he couldn't have saved him anyway, even if he wouldn't have been handcuffed. Two-tier policing may exist, and I'm looking for you to give me evidence of that if you want to, because I don't see any evidence of it. Are there policies in place that say that police need to have more racial diversity training and equality training? Yes. I don't know what all those policies are, and I will start to look at that because it can be quite worrying or disturbing to hear that and not know what they are. But until I do that, I'm not going to say that it's a two-tier policing system. And that's because I don't see evidence for a two-tiered policing system, right? Now, let's have a look at some factual evidence of what was said at the sentencing of Vikram Digwal. You carried on telling these wicked lies when police attended on the scene, hampering them in doing their job and effectively obstructing the course of justice. You kept Henry's phone with the incriminating recording of you on it. You had no intention of handing it over. It was found on you after you had been arrested and taken into police custody. So, what we know, the number one contributing factor to Henry's death was that he was stabbed. The second was that Vikram and Gurpreet both lied repeatedly to the 999 call handler, and they lied to the police. They are the two biggest contributing factors. We now know that being handcuffed was not, because the police could not have saved him irrespective, an ambulance couldn't have saved him. We know that. They're facts. The pathologist has said this, okay? So what we've got here is we've got evidence of not a two-tier policing system, a perversion of the course of justice by the very people who murdered Henry, right? That is evidential because it's in the sentencing report. That's what the judge believes happened. That's what the jury believes happened. So why do you believe anything different? And you want to say evidence of a two-tiered policing system. I'll tell you a good evidence of a two-tier policing system. What about the fact that young black males are 6 to 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched? Right? So then we've got a disparity in policing, haven't we? So it just doesn't support what you want it to support. So then we get Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson will want to say to you, yeah, look at the way that far-right protests are handled compared to the left protests, and look at the way that they deal with us. And well, okay, so there's a reason for that though, right? So far-right protests will, there's no evidence, mind, there's zero evidence to say that far-right protests are systemically policed more harshly. None. There's no consistent pattern of evidence to say that. But let's say that's what you're going to say happens. The right are punished more harshly than the left, right? As part of your evidence. Let's have a look at this. Far-right protests are generally smaller, which means they're easier to police, which means that police are going to be more proactive, right? So generally though, they're more likely to involve violence, alcohol, racist chants and confrontations with counter-protesters, the police and journalists. These are facts. Now, if you're more likely to be violent, consume alcohol, be racist, confront the police, the media, and counter-protesters, you're the sort of people who will want the police to be dealing with. I don't want them to be dealing with this left or Muslim or Islamic protest or whatever other protest over here that's primarily non-violent, and the evidence suggests that, I don't want them to deal with that. I want them to deal with you. I want to deal with you, the people who we've got evidence to say are like systematically a problem. That's why I want them to police harshly. 100%. I mean, think of it this way. There's a reason the police don't line the spectators out and march them into a cricket match. There's a reason the police aren't lining up and marching Novak Djokovic's supporters into Wimbledon, right? Because there's no violence and aggression at cricket matches and at tennis matches. However, the police do line up and march in opposing football teams. Go to a London derby. I guarantee you the police are 100% separating teams and lining them up, and there's hundreds of police there. That's not two-tier policing. That's policing the issue, right? They are policing the issue. So what we've got to do is we've got to stop using this sad incident where there were many flaws and they are being dealt with. The police will investigate that, and there's a huge outcry from the police itself, from the judicial system, for it to be investigated and for it to be rectified. That is being done, okay? And we will get to the bottom of what went wrong, and we will find out what the consequences of that are for this officer and all the officers involved. And I can't wait to find out what that is. I'm looking forward to reading that and seeing what happens. But that is evidence. Everything I've presented you here is evidence of one of two things: a massive prejudice to an investigation by the very people who committed the crime. The lying of Vikram and Gurpreet and the father and the mother, who are all still in prison awaiting trial. The brother, the father and the mother, they're all still in prison. So justice is being done. It is. If you want justice, it is being carried out. In fact, Vikram's sentence is being reviewed because of it's apparently too lenient at minimum 21 years. Brilliant. I hope he gets life forever. Never going to come out. Excellent. But it's evidence that appropriate policing and judicial process is actually being carried out, right? There's evidence that there was flaws and things happened and mistakes were made. And that is what we should be looking at. Now, we've looked at this from an evidential point of view. And I can say, even after this and reviewing it again with you guys, I see no evidence of a two-tiered policing system. And this case is certainly not it. So please stop using it as your evidence.